In the summer of 1998, 7 children entered an adventure park and were never seen again. Their wristbands were never scanned at the exit. No bodies, no witnesses, no suspects. The case went cold. Until 25 years later, a decommissioned scanner reactivated. One of their wristbands was still scanning. If you're drawn to long-lost disappearances, buried secrets, and disturbing revelations that hide in plain sight, subscribe. July 2nd, 2023. Location: Lost Valley Adventure Park, Security Maintenance Office, Oregon. The hum of old electronics had long since faded into the stillness. Dust blanketed the row of ticket scanners like grave markers. A coiled extension cord sagged under its own weight, forgotten in a corner. The air in the security maintenance room was thick with mildew and machine oil, untouched for years, until tonight. Matt Lawley had been working for the new redevelopment firm for 6 months. Most of the time he cleared brush or hauled out old cables. But this week, his task was different. Power up the old systems for cataloging. Lost Valley Adventure Park had shut down in 2001, 3 years after the vanishing. No one said that part aloud. Not the investors, not the planners. The official reason had been bankruptcy. The truth was more complicated. Matt tapped the side of a rusted breaker box. A few lights stuttered to life. Old fans whirred and rattled. Screens blinked and went black again. Then, one small green diode glowed steady. Beep. He froze. A low rhythmic beep echoed from the wall-mounted scanner across the room, model RSV6, last manufactured in 1997. The screen flickered to life in low-resolution green. Wristband scan. Detected ID 065-LVA-CH7 date, July 2, 2023. Time, 21:17. Status: active. Matt took a step back. The system wasn't connected to any network. The RFID reader hadn't been touched in over 2 decades. He double-checked the cable lines. The scanner wasn't even supposed to be online yet. Another beep. The same ID. A wristband. Still scanning. From a child who should have been long dead. July 3rd, 2023. Location: Forest Grove Police Department. Oregon Detective Isabel Harlow hadn't expected the case to come back. Not after 25 years of silence. But the moment the receptionist dropped the incident report on her desk that morning, her stomach dropped. She read the top line twice, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Scanner reboot. Active wristband. Detected 065-LVACH7. She sat there frozen, her coffee cooling in her hand. She hadn't seen that code in over 2 decades, but she remembered it. Everyone who worked the Lost Valley case did. 7 kids, all gone in the span of 36 minutes. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no answers. Now, out of nowhere, one of their wristbands had just pinged. She stood slowly, folded the paper, and reached for her keys. By mid-morning, Isabel was winding her car down the narrow road that led to the old perimeter of Lost Valley Adventure Park. The place had been shut down since 2001, first temporarily for the investigation, then permanently after lawsuits and debt piled up. In the years since, the trees had reclaimed much of the outer walkways, vines creeping up over broken signage, rusted gates, and the sun-bleached faces of forgotten mascots. At the entrance gate, a man in his late 20s waved her over, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He introduced himself as Matt Lawley, a systems engineer with the redevelopment firm now overseeing the property. "I didn't touch anything," he said as she stepped out of her car. "Didn't want to mess it up." "What exactly did you find?" Matt held up a small device, its screen still lit. "We were running diagnostics on the old infrastructure, seeing if any of the original RFID scanners still had juice. Most didn't, but then this one." It started pinging. Repeatedly. Same signal. Every 20 minutes. It's like someone's walking past it in a loop. Could it be interference? A glitch? He shook his head. It's a direct read. Full authentication match. I looked it up. It's one of the original wristbands, 065LVA-CH7. Tyler Greaves, 11 years old. Last seen heading into the Jungle Maze attraction. One of the 7. Where's the scanner now? She asked. Matt led her around the edge of the fencing, through a torn section of chain link, and into the overgrowth. They pushed through tangled weeds and brittle branches until they reached a squat concrete security building, half collapsed under its own roof line. Inside, one corner still had power, likely tied to the maintenance grid. A soft green light pulsed faintly from the base of the scanner. Beep. Wristband detected. ID 065-LVA-CH7. Jesus, Isabel whispered. When was the last scan? About 15 minutes ago, Matt said, and every 20 minutes since 6:40 this morning. She stared at the blinking light. Can you triangulate it? Figure out where the signal's coming from? Matt hesitated. That's the weird part. It's static. The signal doesn't move. It's like whoever has the wristband is standing in the exact same spot, not leaving, not shifting. Could be stuck on something nearby, she said, maybe wedged in the wall. He looked at her uneasily. Or inside the wall. Back at the station that afternoon, Isabel pulled the Lost Valley case files from storage. Most were digital now, but she preferred the physical files. They felt heavier, more real, like someone was still owed something. She spread the folders across her desk, 7 in total. Tyler Greaves, Lila Chen, Jordan Pike, Maggie Clune, Dorian Fields, Ricky Alvarez, Kyle James. They hadn't all disappeared from the same place. That was one of the many disturbing facts that made the case so difficult to piece together. Tyler was last seen entering the Jungle Maze. Lila had been on the Jungle Tram. Ricky was in line for ice cream. Maggie had just exited the Tilt-A-Tornado ride. They vanished in sequence, not all at once. The surveillance system, newly installed at the time, had conveniently gone offline that afternoon. Power spike. Total data corruption. The entire park was on backup systems for hours, with no camera footage to review. The chaperone, a 19-year-old named Trevor Keane, disappeared 5 days later. Foul play was suspected, but no trace of him was ever found either. Isabel opened Tyler's file first. His missing persons photo still looked impossibly fresh. Bright eyes, slight dimple on his left cheek, a smear of grape popsicle on his shirt collar. The witness statements were thin. A few kids reported seeing a man with a radio near the Jungle Maze. One girl described hearing clicking sounds and seeing a door she'd never noticed before, tucked behind some vines. No such door was ever found during the sweep, but the maze was a patchwork of illusion and plywood corridors. It would have been easy to hide something in plain sight. By early evening, Isabel circled back to the RFID log from the scanner. The last ping had occurred just after 6:17 p.m., which stopped her cold. She'd been at the station then. Matt had left hours ago. No one should have been near that scanner. And yet, the wristband was still scanning. She grabbed her keys and headed for her car. Dusk had started to fall by the time she reached the outer trail behind the Jungle Maze. Most of the themed structures had collapsed under time and weather. But the maze itself, constructed from reinforced materials and layered with fiberglass foliage, still stood, more or less intact. Isabel moved carefully through the overgrown path, flashlight in hand, cutting through the hanging moss and rotted fake trees, left at the panther statue, right at the fake waterfall, past the collapsed rope bridge. Then, something new. A door. Not part of the original blueprint, not in any report, not in any of the maintenance logs. It was metal, cold, and locked with a keypad mounted in the wall beside it. almost industrial, like it had been repurposed from somewhere else. Half hidden behind frayed vines, tucked in a dead-end corridor where a child might easily wander. Confused, alone. Isabel stepped closer, raising her flashlight. Just as she reached for the handle, she heard it. Click. The sound of a lock disengaging from the inside. July 4th, 2023. Location: Lost Valley Adventure Park, Jungle Maze Sector. The metal door creaked open less than an inch before freezing in place, like whatever force had nudged it from the inside had second-guessed itself. Isabel didn't move. She stood there in the thick, breathless dark, her flashlight beam trembling slightly against the moss-draped frame. She called out, firmly but without force. "Forest Grove PD, if someone's in there, I need you to answer me." No sound came in return, just the low hiss of insects, the distant hum of the forest reclaiming this artificial world. She tried the handle. Locked. The electronic keypad beside the door had gone dark again, as if whatever unlocked it had only done so momentarily, like a glitch in the system or a warning. She stepped back, scanned the area again. Nothing but crushed fiberglass ferns and the rotting skeleton of a treehouse set meant to mimic a jungle watchtower. She took a picture of the door, noted its exact position using her phone's GPS, then marked it manually on a printed park map she kept folded in her field bag. The wristband ping had stopped. The green scanner light inside the security shed had gone silent. By mid-morning, fireworks cracked in the distance, remnants of the town's early Independence Day celebration. Isabel sat in her office with the door closed, the scent of damp pine still clinging to her clothes. She spread out the park's original blueprints, copies from the city archive, brittle at the edges, ink faded to a ghostly gray. She traced the jungle maze's perimeter with a pencil, then drew a red circle where she'd found the hidden door. That space wasn't listed. In fact, the official layout showed a blank zone at that location, marked as Storage Tunnel, sealed 1997. But Isabel had grown up here. She'd been to Lost Valley as a kid, and she was certain no tunnel entrance had ever been visible to the public. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Melanie Ruiz, tech analyst on loan from the Portland office for cold case digitization. "I heard you pulled the Lost Valley files," Melanie said. "Something new?" Isabel slid the scanner report across the desk. Melanie read it once, her eyes widening slightly. "That's an active scan." 7 scans, over 5 hours, Isabel said, all originating from the same location. "The band still has battery?" "It shouldn't," Isabel said. "They were designed for 48 hours, maybe 72 tops. That was 25 years ago." Melanie sat down, scanning the report again. So either someone found it and managed to reboot the tech, or it never left. Later that afternoon, Isabel returned to the old park with a city inspector and a locksmith. The gate protested as they forced it open wider. Thorns caught on their sleeves as they retraced her steps through the overgrowth and into the jungle maze sector. The hidden door was still there, still shut. No signs of entry or disturbance, no footprints, though the damp soil made prints unpredictable. The locksmith examined the keypad. Older model, looks custom, might not even be commercial tech. "Can you get it open?" "Not today. I'll need to bring specialized tools, maybe cut through if we can't bypass the circuit." The inspector took measurements and notes, muttering under his breath about unpermitted structures, citing 3 clear violations just from the outer frame alone. Isabel let him rant. None of it mattered. Not yet. What mattered was what was behind the door. She crouched, brushing away debris from the base. A hairline gap was visible beneath the metal. She shone her flashlight through it. Dust particles danced in the beam, but beyond that, nothing. Just darkness. Deep, undisturbed, unnatural. a space no one was supposed to know existed. Back at the station that evening, Isabel dug through archived maintenance records. Most of it was boilerplate. Ride inspections, technician logs, and safety audits from the park's final 2 years. But in one folder, she found a report filed just 3 weeks before the disappearances in '98. Maintenance log, Jungle Maze Sector. Technician A. Gruber. Auditory bleed-through reported near northwest wall. Whirring noise behind static panel. No access from guest side, requesting follow-up. Possible subfloor ventilation malfunction. The report was unsigned. No follow-up form was filed. Another page in the same file caught her attention. It was a requisition order, unusual for a theme park. Part request, 3 times military-grade EM shielding sheets, lead laminated. Vendor, DevMax Technologies, Seattle, Washington. Purpose, storage room conversion, approved by J. Dorn. There was no record of a J. Dorn in any company directory. No corresponding permit. No indication of a storage room conversion in any other department files. She picked up the phone. "Melanie," she said, "can you look into DevMax Technologies? See if they've ever filed a government contract. I think Lost Valley was installing something they weren't supposed to." "Got it," Melanie said. "You think it's tied to the disappearances?" "I think the door wasn't the only thing built to stay hidden." As the sky dimmed and the town's firework finale crackled over distant hills, Isabel sat alone in the evidence room, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. She laid out copies of each child's file, staring at their faces once more. 7 kids. No connection beyond that one trip. No similar backgrounds, no shared school district. It was a patchwork of strangers, brought together for one weekend outing arranged through a local youth raffle. A raffle run by a church-sponsored community group that shut down 6 months after the disappearances. The records from the group were sparse. The organizer had moved to Florida and refused contact. The event coordinator, Miriam Dyer, died in 2004 in a house fire. Only one contact remained. A name scribbled in the margins of an old newspaper clipping. Eldon Carr. She remembered the name faintly. He had been a groundskeeper. Not an employee of the park, but a contracted landscaper. He'd been questioned during the original investigation, but dismissed as a low-priority lead. She typed the name into the DMV database. An address popped up. Still local, still alive, and still living just 15 minutes from the park. July 5th, 2023. Location, Forest Grove, Oregon. Residence of Eldon Carr. The Carr house sat behind a wall of overgrowth, buried beneath 30 years of neglect and moss-choked memory. The front porch sagged. A wind chime made from rusted keys tinkled softly in the breeze. Isabel parked on the street, taking a moment before stepping out. The neighborhood had changed, but not this house. It looked like it had been left behind by time and by intention. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder. The curtain moved, then the door creaked open a few inches. A single eye peered through the gap. "Eldon Carr?" she asked. The eye blinked. "Who's asking?" "Detective Isabel Lake. Forest Grove PD. He didn't open the door wider, but he didn't shut it either. I'm not in trouble. I'm not here to arrest you, Mr. Carretera. I'm here about Lost Valley." The pause that followed was long. "I'm retired. It's about the disappearances. From '98. The door clicked, opened fully. Carr stood barefoot, wiry and gray, his face marked by sun and time. His t-shirt was threadbare. He looked older than 70. Maybe because he was. Or maybe because he carried something no one had ever made him speak out loud. "You better come in," he muttered. The inside of the house smelled like cedar and dust. Yellowing newspapers sat stacked waist-high along one wall. Most of them dated pre-2000. A dusty aquarium with no fish flickered with a blue light. Carr led her through the living room to a back sunroom covered in ivy from the outside. "You want coffee or are we skipping the pleasantries?" he asked. "Let's skip." Carr lowered himself into a chair with a long, creaky sigh. "I always knew someone had come back around. I just didn't think it'd take 25 years. You were contracted for landscaping at Lost Valley, correct?" He nodded slowly. "Weekly grounds maintenance, from April of '96 to the day they shut the gates. Were you on the property the day the children vanished?" "No," he said without hesitation. "But I was there the day before." He scratched his cheek, looked past her like the words lived in the corner shadows. They were working late that week. Not the usual crews. Outsiders. Had rental vans with no logos. Brought in sealed crates. Wouldn't let us near the north wall. Isabel leaned forward. "What were they doing?" "Building something," he said. "Underground, I think." "Did you report that?" Carr laughed without humor. "To who?" "Management. They were the ones who signed the permits. Police. They never came back after the first sweep. Nobody wanted the park blamed. Too many hands in the pockets." He paused, breathing shallow now. "But I saw something." "What did you see?" Carr stood slowly and disappeared down the hall. When he returned, he held a small cardboard box covered in duct tape. He sat it down on the table and opened it. Inside was a VHS tape, a rolled blueprint, and a Polaroid photograph. He slid the photo toward her. It was dated July 3rd, 1998, the day before the disappearances. The image showed a group of men standing outside the jungle maze wall. 5 of them, all wearing black jumpsuits, all blurred slightly, as if the photo had been taken in haste or through glass. But one detail stood out. Each man wore an RFID wristband on their left wrist. Later that afternoon, Isabel took the contents of the box to the station. Melanie met her in the evidence room and carefully unspooled the rolled blueprint. It was brittle but legible. A side profile of the park. Beneath the jungle maze, a second level was marked out in fine ink. Sublevel B, Access Panel B7. Design, DevMax Technologies. Seattle intended use, containment observation. Melanie looked up pale. "Containment of what?" "I think," Isabel said, "they built a test chamber beneath the park, and the wristbands were part of it." "You think the kids were taken down there?" "I don't know yet." They digitized the VHS tape. The footage was grainy. Surveillance quality. A static shot from what appeared to be a maintenance corridor. Stamped Sector B. Time code in the lower left corner, July 4th, 1998, 1 a.m. The sound was warped, but the image was clear enough. A child entered frame. Then another, and another. 7 total. Each wearing matching white t-shirts. Each wearing an RFID wristband, none accompanied by adults. The camera flickered once, then cut to black. That night, Isabel drove back to the park. She walked alone, her flashlight cutting through the vines and metal skeletons. Past the fallen log ride, past the rotting cotton candy stand, back to the metal door in the jungle maze. She stared at it for a long time. Then she noticed something. Scratches on the paint. Not vandalism. Fingernail marks. Tiny arcs clustered around the edge of the frame. She leaned closer. There were 7 rows. 7 separate sets of marks, like someone inside had tried to claw their way out. July 6th, 2023. Location, Forest Grove Police Department, Cold Case Division. Isabel didn't sleep. By the time the sun lit the station windows, she was already back at her desk, hunched over the blueprint of Lost Valley with a pencil and ruler. Red circles, black arrows, markings for access panels, service corridors, and the narrow shaft labeled B7. The same designation etched into the blueprint Carr had preserved like a curse. Melanie entered carrying 2 coffees. Isabel's had no cream, just how she liked it. She didn't look up when her partner placed the cup beside her. "They buried something, Mel," Isabel murmured. "Literally." Melanie leaned in, examining the paper. Underground containment beneath a children's park, built by a Seattle tech firm. That doesn't feel like summer fun. It feels like a trial site. For what? Isabel tapped the words, containment observation, underlined on the blueprint. I don't know yet, but they planned it, they built it, and they sealed it up. By mid-morning, Isabel was staring at an article pulled from the Microfiche archive, dated July 7, 1998, 2 days after the disappearance. Adventure Park shuts down. After 7 children vanished during fireworks event, parents demand answers as authorities search for leads. The story was shallow, sanitized enough to leave a bitter aftertaste. No mention of witnesses, no mention of staff behavior, no technical inspections. Just a quote from the park's founder, Samuel Reinhardt. We are devastated by the tragedy and fully cooperating. Lost Valley has always prioritized the safety of our guests. Melanie appeared at her side, waving a manila folder. You'll want this. Financial records from the park's final year. Got 'em from the tax archive. She opened the folder. Isabel frowned. What the hell is Project Everlight? 2 hours later, they were sitting across from a woman in her 70s with fading makeup and a nervous smile. She stirred her tea too much and checked the window 3 times before speaking. Eleanor Fontaine had worked at Lost Valley in 1998 as a guest services supervisor. I don't know much, she said, but I remember the week before it happened. Things changed. How so? Isabel asked. Security. It doubled overnight. Uniformed men who weren't from Forest Grove. No name tags, no friendliness. The kind who look past you when you talk. Did they interact with guests? Only once, July 3rd, a boy got lost in the maze. I remember. I was there when his mother screamed for help. These men stepped in, not the regular staff, took him away, said he'd been found and returned him 10 minutes later. Was the boy hurt? No, Eleanor whispered. But he wouldn't stop staring. Not at anyone, not at anything, just staring. And he wet himself. That afternoon, Isabel stood in the narrow file room beneath the department archives, flipping through the disaster box labeled Lost Valley Incident, 1998. One dusty plastic evidence bag caught her attention. Inside it, a wristband, RFID embedded. White plastic, cracked slightly at the edges. The last name written in black marker, still legible, Vance. She brought it to tech. The lab was quiet, just the soft hum of servers and the flicker of fluorescent lights. Isabel handed the wristband to a technician named Caleb. He squinted at the device. Old Gen RFID, he muttered. Pre-2000, passive tag, might still respond. He placed it under a scanner connected to a diagnostic monitor. The screen blinked, then displayed a code. Access code verified. B7. Wait, Isabel said. You're saying this wristband still pings to a system? It's searching for a reader, Caleb said. That means the system must still exist, somewhere. That evening, Isabel returned to the park. This time, she brought bolt cutters. The door behind the jungle maze resisted at first. Layers of rust and time had sealed it like a tomb, but after several attempts and a snapped blade, the latch gave. The hinges screamed as the door opened. She stepped inside. Stale air, Moldavian, the faint scent of iron and oil. A descending staircase disappeared into darkness. She paused at the top, one hand gripping her flashlight, the other trembling at her side. She took a step, then another, each footfall echoing like a countdown. 50 steps down, the air changed, thicker, electric. The stairwell ended in a metal hallway, smooth walls, sterile, unlike anything above. The corridor turned left, then right, and stopped at another sealed door with a recessed panel beside it. Isabel removed the Vance wristband from her pocket. She held it to the panel. A long beep. Then, access granted. Sublevel B7. The door slid open. She stepped inside. The room was vast, circular, surrounded by glass observation booths. In the center, 7 beds, small, child-sized, each with leather restraints at the ankles and wrists. On the walls, faded logos in paint, DevMax and Everlight. And across the back wall, written in smeared red, "It only worked on some of them." July 7th, 2023. Location: Sub-Level B7, beneath Lost Valley Adventure Park. The air in Sub-Level B7 hadn't moved in 25 years. Dust clung to everything. Flatlined monitors, shattered beakers, broken restraints. Isabel stepped lightly, flashlight beam tracking across tiled floors and cold steel. Every movement echoed in a vacuum of silence. Her fingers hovered over the wall of monitors. The glass screens were dead, but she traced the dustless outline where a handprint remained. Small. Child-sized. Melanie's voice broke through Isabel's radio. "You're still down there?" Isabel swallowed. "It's not a bunker, Mel. It's a lab." Back at the precinct by midday, Isabel called in favors. Carr came out of retirement to consult. He stood with arms crossed, staring at the blueprint on the wall like it was a betrayal. "I knew there was more," he muttered. "But I never found that room." "We need to know what was being tested," Isabel said. "Who funded this? And why 7 children ended up connected to it?" Carr narrowed his eyes. "Have you heard of the OCP trials?" "Operational Conditioning Protocol," Isabel said. "That's military-grade psychological conditioning, rumored, never confirmed." Carr nodded grimly. "It was real. I saw similar setups during my DC time. Observation domes, environmental manipulation. But it was always for adults, soldiers, prisoners. So what was this?" Carr pointed to the old DevMax logo. "Field test, on children." They pulled the names again, the 7 who vanished. Ava Lynn Daniel Vance, Lily Holloway. Zach Ortiz, Nora Raymond, Mason Keys, Ezra Blake, all between 7 and 10 years old. All issued RFID wristbands upon entry. None of them found. Not even remains. Melanie read their profiles aloud like prayer beads. 5 were from out of state. None knew each other. 2 had recently been in therapy. 3 had been adopted. Isabel paused. Common thread. Melanie frowned. They were all observed, in some capacity. Social workers, child psychologists, caseworkers. Pre-screened, Isabel said. For what? Later that afternoon, Carr handed Isabel a lead on an old DevMax employee now living under a new name. Thomas Weller, age 74, former field systems engineer. He now lived in a care home outside Portland. Early onset dementia, limited speech. But Carr warned her. He was part of the team. He knows. The room was quiet when Isabel entered. Weller sat in a wheelchair, window light casting a pale glow over his weathered face. Isabel crouched beside him, showed him the blueprint, showed him the logo, showed him a photo of Daniel Vance. Weller flinched. Then, in a voice like gravel, he whispered, "She lied to us. Said it was about attention, behavior." "Who?" Weller looked past her, eyes unfocused. She called it the transition phase. That night, Isabel stared at a whiteboard in her apartment covered in photos and strings of twine. At the center, transition phase circled in red. She couldn't sleep, so she watched the old security footage again. Only one clear shot of the maze entrance. A timestamp glitch showed 10:41 p.m. She paused. A tiny figure darting past the gate. Another followed. Then static. But not just any static. One frame, frozen between glitches. She zoomed in. There, in the background, was a reflection in the glass. Not a child. An adult. Watching them. Smiling. The next morning she returned to B7. This time she brought forensics. The team swept the room, cataloging everything. Samples, swabs. A single hard drive buried beneath a false floor, covered in plastic. Label, Everlight Main. They took it back to the lab. By dusk, Caleb had it running on an isolated system. Most files corrupted, he said, but some audio logs survived. He handed Isabel a set of headphones. She sat. Hit play. Audio log number 32. Female voice. Subject 4 did not respond to auditory phase stimuli. Increased dosage of compound 9. Subject 6 now mimicking emotional states without prompting. We are observing preliminary signs of induced empathy inversion. Log number 33. One child keeps asking about the others. We're separating her today. She's not stabilizing. Monitor for cognitive echo. Isabel yanked off the headset. Jesus, what is this? Melanie asked, watching her. Isabel whispered, they weren't lost. She looked at the floor. They were chosen. July 9th, 2023. Location, Tangle Ridge, Oregon. Care Facility Room 204. Thomas Weller was gone. Not just emotionally checked out, gone. Vanished from his care home sometime during the night. Security footage showed a man in a maintenance uniform walking into room 204 at 2:18 a.m., then leading Weller out through the laundry corridor. The problem? That hallway was sealed for renovation. No one was supposed to have access. When Isabel reviewed the tape herself, something chilled her deeper than the breach. The man leading Weller away never turned toward the camera. But in the brief moment he passed beneath a motion light, Isabel saw a familiar glint on his wrist. A park wristband. It blinked green. By midday, Isabel was back at the precinct with Melanie, Caleb, and Carr gathered around a digital pin board. The screen was filled with overlapping maps, timelines, and audio transcriptions. Melanie zoomed in on a segment labeled Transition Phase, Key Terms, Echo Conditioning, Emotional Displacement, Behavioral Sculpting, Submersion, Environment Phase, Bleed. These aren't psychological terms, she said, at least not ones in any published study. They're fabricated, Carr muttered. Language meant to hide what it really was. What was it really? Isabel asked. Carr didn't hesitate. A personality erasure protocol. Caleb turned from his computer. I decrypted more of the hard drive. There are logs referencing environmental simulation. Controlled zones with modified architecture, light cycles, soundscapes, even smell. They weren't just testing behavior. They were rewriting identity. Melanie looked stunned. In children. In children, Carr repeated darkly. Because children adapt faster than adults, especially under stress. That evening, Isabel returned to her apartment to find an envelope slid under her door. No return address, no stamps. Just her name written in precise block letters. Inside, a single printed photograph. 7 children. Mud-streaked, sun-drenched, squinting in the light. They stood on a grassy hill that didn't exist in any known section of Lost Valley Park. Isabel flipped the photo. On the back, one word was written in pen. After. She stared at it for a long time, then picked up her keys. The next morning, Carr arranged a meeting with a woman who once worked for DevMax under a different name, Margot Shane, a former systems integration specialist. They met at a diner off Interstate 84, a lonely chrome outpost surrounded by nothing but wind and brush. Margot was in her 60s, tight-lipped and already smoking when they arrived. She didn't look up. I shouldn't be talking to you, she said. They watch everyone who left. Who's they? Isabel asked. Everlight, DevMax, third parties. You think those kids just disappeared? Number they were absorbed. Carr leaned forward. Into what? Margot finally looked up. Into the program. She sketched something on a napkin. It looked like a floor plan at first. Hexagonal chambers connected by narrow tunnels. In the center, a node labeled Mirror Room. That's where the breakdowns happened, she said. Sensory conflict, loss of timeline memory. We called it the breach point. And what happened to the children who reached it? Margot tapped the napkin. They either broke. She dragged her finger to another node labeled observation level. Or they became compliant. Compliant how? Isabel asked. Margot crushed her cigarette into the napkin. They forgot who they were, forgot they were ever anyone else. That night, Isabel returned to the basement of Lost Valley. This time, she brought a ground-penetrating radar unit and a 2-person recovery crew. The deeper they went, the colder it got. On sub-level B8, a hollow reading stopped them cold. "There's something beneath this wall," said one of the crew. Isabel ordered the drills. It took 40 minutes to breach the false concrete. What they found was not a room. It was a corridor. Narrow, silent. Along one wall, 7 lockers, each painted black, numbered 1 through 7. Inside locker 4, Isabel found a child's shoe. Blue, untied. Inside locker 6, a drawing. Crayon on faded paper, 7 stick figures, 1 standing apart. As they emerged hours later, the moon hung low and swollen. Isabel stood at the park's edge, staring at the forgotten tower near the rusted bumper cars. It looked like a drop tower, but the cart had no restraints, just a standing platform, now bolted in place. She shined her flashlight upward. A faint humming came from the top. Mechanical, pulsing. Caleb's voice buzzed through her radio. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I ran the serial on one of the corrupted audio files. It links back to a company that developed stage illusion tech in the 90s. Meaning they built sets that looked real. Environments designed to disorient. Stage illusions inside the park?" Isabel said, heart pounding. "Fake rides, fake exits, fake walls. Exactly. Even the terrain may have been manipulated." She looked back toward the drop tower. Nothing was what it seemed. As dawn broke, Isabel reviewed the drawing again. The 7 stick figures, a detail she missed before chilled her. Each stick figure had a wristband, but the one standing apart had 2. One black, one blinking green. July 10th, 2023. Location, Lost Valley Adventure Park. Sub-level C, restricted zone. The air changed below sub-level C. It wasn't just cooler, it felt wrong. Thicker, like the molecules themselves had been tampered with. Isabel held her breath longer than necessary as they passed through the industrial door that hadn't been opened in over 2 decades. It wasn't rusted shut. It had been welded. The torch marks were still visible, deliberate, scorched in semicircles, like someone had tried to trap something inside. Carr and Isabel exchanged a look, then stepped through. The floor was gridded metal now, suspended above concrete. A catwalk. On either side, 2-way mirrors. But the glass was cracked, age or pressure, making it possible to see what had once been hidden. Behind one mirror, a mock classroom. Miniature desks. A whiteboard scribbled with half-erased phrases. Behind the other, a child's bedroom, pink wallpaper, a stuffed rabbit in the corner, a camera mounted in the ceiling. Melanie shivered behind them. "It's a set. They staged reality, monitored responses." "Conditioned identity," Carr added. "Where's the control room?" Isabel asked. Caleb pointed down the corridor. "There." The door to the control room had 3 locks, digital, manual, and retinal. Caleb bypassed the first 2, but for the retinal scanner, he retrieved a single preserved eyeball from cold storage, recovered from the same evidence locker the park's buried data drive came from. It worked. Inside, dust lay untouched across every surface, but the equipment, despite its age, was far too advanced for the 1990s. Modular screens, audio modulation tech, neural mapping interfaces that hadn't existed outside of DARPA labs until the 2000s. "What the hell was this place?" Melanie whispered. Isabel booted one of the primary drives. A flicker. Then a video file loaded. Date: August 4th, 1998. Subject: Trial Unit 6A, Field Descent, Stage 2. The screen showed a chamber. 7 children standing in a line. Each wore matching gray jumpsuits and identical green wristbands. But one child, a girl with dark curls, was trembling. A voice from an unseen speaker crackled, "Identify your safe marker." The children pointed to different walls. "Now identify your true name." Silence. "Repeat. What were you called before the park?" No one answered. The screen flickered. The scene cut to later. Now the children were alone, separated in small cubicles. The camera showed only the girl with dark curls. She was humming to herself. Isabel leaned forward. "I know that song," she said softly. Carr nodded. "It's Down in the Valley. The same lullaby from the VHS found with the blinking wristband." The girl hummed louder, then stopped, then looked directly into the camera. "You're not my parents," she said. Later that afternoon, Isabel returned to the evidence vault. She needed the girl's name. She needed any piece of history that hadn't been scrubbed. She found it in a misfiled police report from 1999. A woman, Margaret Keene, had called from a hospital in Eastern Oregon, claiming she recognized a child on the news coverage about the Lost Valley disappearance. "She came into my ER," the report read. Said her name was Etta, said she didn't like her new name, said the son didn't feel real anymore. The report was never followed up. No formal interview. No further documentation. Just 2 notes in the margin. Dissociation. Transfer failed. That evening, Melanie requested a psychological consult on the original 7 children based on available footage and surviving notes. The forensic psychologist reviewed just 2 of the tapes before stopping. "I don't think they were abducted," she said flatly. "I think they were reprogrammed." "You mean brainwashed?" Carr asked. "Number worse. The technique here, it's not cultic, it's methodical. Deconstruction of language, identity, emotional rhythm. You strip a child of their context, of their name, of their memory. You can build something else, something compliant, something obedient." "Why children?" Isabel asked again. The woman paused. "Because children don't break. They bend." Isabel couldn't sleep that night. Her apartment was filled with old maps, photographs, wristband chips. She pinned them to the wall, forming a visual timeline. Construction permits from 1995, DevMax contracts, missing persons flyers, surveillance stills, park ride schematics. At the center, she pinned the photograph of the 7 children standing on the grassy hill. She stared at the girl with the dark curls. Etta. And something clicked. She took out her phone and played the old VHS rip again, the one showing a little girl in a replica bedroom, singing to a rabbit. It was Etta. Same voice, same left-handed gestures, but her name on the file label was different. Subject Delta, alias Kimber. The voice on the tape spoke again. "Do you want to go back upstairs, Kimber?" Etta's voice whispered. "I'm not her." The next morning, a breakthrough came not from the files, but from a janitor who'd worked the lower levels of Lost Valley in 1998. He'd been paid in cash, untraceable, no employee ID. But when he saw the story on the news, he called in. Said he remembered a girl who always stood still when the others played. "She never blinked," he told them. "Like she was watching something behind your face." "Do you remember her name?" Isabel asked. He thought for a moment. "No, ma'am. But she always asked about the sun. Said it didn't look right. Said it wasn't yellow enough." The team revisited the ride schematics from the park. One ride stood out. A simulated hot air balloon experience called Sky Dream. It was shuttered 2 months before the disappearances. Isabel tracked down a promotional video. It wasn't a ride. It was a soundproofed dome. Inside, a projection sky, artificial sun, looping wind noises. "Why simulate the sky?" Melanie asked. Isabel whispered, "Because they never let them see the real one." That night, Isabel opened her inbox to find a new message. No subject, no sender. Inside, a single frame from a security cam. Thomas Weller, walking through the hallway of the abandoned hotel wing beneath Lost Valley, still wearing his hospital gown. And, on his wrist, a black band, no glow, just one word embedded on the plastic. Return, July 11th, 2023. Location, Lost Valley Adventure Park, Hotel Suboval. The stairwell descended farther than it should have. Carr counted the steps under his breath as he followed Isabel, Melanie, and Caleb down into the depths of the decommissioned hotel wing. They'd left behind the polished marble floors and faux luxury decor of the upper resort. What remained beneath was raw concrete, faint mildew, and the whisper of industrial air that hadn't flowed in years. The door at the bottom had no handle, just a narrow black slot, shaped exactly like the RFID bands the children once wore. "Try it," Isabel told Caleb. He slid the deactivated green wristband they'd recovered from the park's subfloor into the slot. The door clicked and opened inward. They stepped into darkness. Not the kind caused by broken lights, but deliberate absence. A controlled blackout, as if the place had been sealed while still functioning. A soft humming noise began once the door sealed behind them. The lights blinked to life in soft pulses, each revealing more of what had been buried. Rows of twin-sized beds, metal frames, all perfectly aligned. At the foot of each bed, bolted into the floor, a monitoring terminal. Small, rounded screens. One still blinked with green text. Caleb wiped dust from the display. Subject 04, Delta Status Integration. Failed memory loop, active admin override required. Carr's throat tightened. This was never a hotel basement. No, Isabel said. It was housing. For what? Isabel turned slowly. For the ones who didn't go home. By midday, they'd cataloged over 40 beds, each linked to a different child. Many marked with numbers only, some with two-letter aliases. Zeta, Theta, Beta. All but one terminal was inactive. Only Deltas remained online. And her assigned bed, bed 17, was still made. Sheets untouched, corners crisp. Someone had prepared it recently. "I think she's still alive," Melanie whispered. Isabel didn't answer. She was staring at the floor just beside bed 17. There, in faint marker barely visible under the flickering fluorescence, "I remember my real name" underneath. A child's attempt at cursive. Etta. Later that afternoon, the team reconvened at the Mobile Incident HQ stationed outside the park's main gate. A fresh wave of press had arrived, drawn by whispers of reopened cold cases and potential survivor sightings. Carr silenced his phone. His voicemail box was full. Again. Isabel was reviewing surveillance footage of the hotel's sublevels, looping it frame by frame. Then she paused. "Back up," she said. The video reversed to a blurry timestamp from 2:06 a.m. the night before. A figure stood in the hallway outside the sealed basement. No flashlight, no sound, just standing there. The time code ran for 4 full minutes. Then the figure walked through the door they hadn't yet unlocked. "How?" Caleb asked. Melanie leaned closer. "Is that—" They couldn't see the face, but they could see the wrist. The band glowed orange, a color no one had seen before. They didn't wait. By evening, they were back in the sublevel. The orange band figure hadn't returned, but a door behind the final row of beds had been left ajar. This room was different, carpeted, wallpapered, meant to feel like a child's bedroom, but too clean, too symmetrical. A simulation, not a memory. In the corner sat a CRT monitor hooked to an analog tape deck. A blinking label on the screen. Play to resume integration. File. Delta loop final dot move. Isabel hesitated, then pressed play. The screen filled with static. Then a home video began to emerge. The footage showed a girl seated at a round table. Etta, in front of her, building blocks, each with a different letter. "Can you spell your name?" the voice behind the camera asked. She picked up an E, then TTA. The voice paused. "That's not your name." Etta blinked, confused. "It is. Number your name is Kimber. Try again." She looked down. The blocks trembled in her hand. The camera zoomed in, tight on her face, tears welling. But she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered something. The audio crackled. "What did she say?" Melanie asked. Caleb enhanced the sound. Etta's voice, barely audible. "Let me go home." A knock came from outside the sub-level entrance. Car moved to intercept it, gun drawn. But it was a child, standing barefoot, wearing a dirty hoodie with Lost Valley volunteer staff printed on it in faded ink. Her hair was wild, her eyes hollow, but on her wrist was a glowing orange band. "Are you Etta?" Isabel asked gently. The girl flinched. "I was." "Where have you been?" The girl didn't answer. She only said, "They changed the sky." That night, the girl was placed in protective custody and taken to a pediatric trauma facility outside Austin. She hadn't spoken again. Wouldn't eat. Refused light. But she let them keep the orange band on. Caleb scanned it. Inside, a full memory log. 32 gigabytes of psychological data. It mapped every stage of her transition, her reprogramming, her rebellion. Audio, visuals, even biometric responses during simulated exposure therapy. But one file stood out. A live feed. "Wait," Carr said. "This is still recording." They patched the feed into the secure network. The image came online. A room. Same wallpaper, same bed. Empty, except for one figure sitting on the edge of the mattress. Not Etta. A boy, 11, maybe 12, wearing the same gray jumpsuit. His eyes stared into the lens. His lips moved. No audio. But Caleb read the words. "Am I done yet?" July 13th, 2023. Location: Austin Pediatric Trauma Center, Texas. The girl still hadn't spoken. She slept with the lights off, the door locked from the inside. When nurses checked on her, she was always awake, sitting upright in bed, watching the corner of the ceiling like something waited for her there. Isabel sat with her that morning, cross-legged on the vinyl tile floor. No clipboard, no questions, just presence. The orange wristband had been removed the night before and placed in a lead-lined Faraday box by Federal Techs. But Etta, if that was really her name, had kept her hand clenched as if it were still on her. "They told us it didn't hurt," Isabel said softly. Etta's eyes flicked toward her. "They lied," she whispered. Back at Lost Valley, Caleb and Melanie worked through the memory logs stored on the orange band. The files were encrypted with an older government schema, one last seen in Cold War-era behavioral conditioning archives. "These aren't just surveillance logs," Caleb said, jaw tight. "They're instructional. Someone was teaching this system how to erase people." They decrypted a portion labeled Delta Session 47. It opened with a schematic of a child's brain. Interactive, color-coded. Then a menu. 1. Identity dismantling. 2nd. Caregiver disassociation. 3rd. Cognitive loop reinforcement. 4. Emergency recall lock. "They didn't just try to reprogram her," Melanie muttered. "They gave her an escape hatch." Caleb nodded. "Which she triggered." "Why her?" Caleb stared at the screen. "Because she remembered her real name." By mid-afternoon, Isabel had joined them in the command trailer. Carr stood at the window, arms crossed. A storm was rolling in across the horizon. He didn't trust any of it. Not the girl, not the memory files, not the fact that the park's central servers had gone live again overnight, even though they'd been disconnected. "What if she's not the only one who made it out?" he asked. Isabel rubbed her temples. "You saw the feed. There's a boy still down there. He asked if he was done." Carr turned to her. "And who was watching him?" The trailer fell silent. That evening, Caleb broke through the last encryption layer. It unlocked a real-time control panel, a relic interface designed for authorized program leads. Across the top, Project Sonder, Integration, Phase 2. Active status, compromised operator location, unknown, survivors, 2 out of 7 containment breach, pending. Melanie leaned over. There were 7 kids, she said. 2 alive, 5 unaccounted for. Caleb hesitated. Number not unaccounted for. The feed says containment pending. That means they might still be... Isabel finished it. In the loop. Trapped. Somewhere inside the simulation. Or worse, still believing it's real. That night, the girl spoke again. Isabel returned to the trauma center just after midnight. Etta had requested her by name. She was sitting in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollowed out by fatigue, but sharper somehow. More focused. There was a machine, she said, like a ride, but you didn't go anywhere. You sat still, and it made you forget. Isabel crouched beside her. Do you remember what it was called? Etta nodded. The Reverie. She looked up at Isabel with a shudder. And it's still running. The following morning, under court order and escorted by U.S. Marshals, Carr led a sealed team entry into the service catacombs beneath the park's eastern quadrant, an area built on top of the original foundations of a now-defunct military testing site, according to redacted zoning records. The team located a steel vault embedded beneath the old roller coaster framework. On the exterior, a biometric scanner, and below it, faint text etched in rusted brass. Reverie Initiative, entry authorized personnel only. Etta had drawn the door on paper the night before. Every bolt, every symbol. Let her come, she had said. She's the only one they'll listen to. Isabel was wearing a body cam when she stepped forward and placed Etta's hand against the scanner. It lit up green. The door opened. What lay beyond wasn't a ride. It was a chamber, circular, walls padded like a sensory deprivation room. At the center, a ring of chairs, 7 of them, each with its own monitor, IV feed, and neural cap hanging from a ceiling-mounted arm. 6 chairs were empty. 1 was not. A boy sat slumped, breathing shallow. On his screen, looping footage of a family picnic, perfect and repetitive, ending the same way every time, with the sound of screaming and a forced return to the start. Melanie stepped forward and yanked the power cord. The screen blinked out. The boy stirred, and then whispered, "Are we still in the park?" Outside, the storm broke. Lightning snapped across the dead sky of Lost Valley. The last remnants of the illusion shattered. Isabel walked the boy out by hand. His name was Jeremy. He was 10. He remembered nothing of his real family, but he remembered a voice. "A girl," he said. "She kept telling me to blink twice. Said it would break the loop." "Etta," Isabel said. He nodded. "She saved me." Back at the trauma center, Etta watched through a one-way glass as Jeremy was evaluated. She didn't cry. She only reached for the glass and placed her palm against it. Carr stepped up beside her. "Do you remember how they started it? The whole project?" Etta looked up at him. "They asked us one question," she said. "What was it?" She answered without blinking. "If you could live your happiest memory forever, would you?" July 15th, 2023. Location: Federal Detention Site, undisclosed. The man they arrested in Missouri had no fingerprints, no ID, no prior record, no history in any database, not federal, state, international. He spoke with a flat Midwestern accent and gave only one name: Dr. Orson Vale. When asked what he did for a living, he replied, "Memory ecology." That was the end of his cooperation, until he heard the name Etta. Back in Austin, Isabel was with Etta when the call came through. "Vale's talking," Carr said. "But only if you're on the line." Isabel stared at the phone. "What does he want?" Carr hesitated. To explain. They patched in the call at 2:11 p.m. Vale's voice came through like gravel, measured, emotionless, the cadence of someone who hadn't spoken to another human in years. "Etta," he said, "I didn't think you'd make it out." The girl's eyes narrowed. "You told us the reverie would keep us safe." Vale didn't flinch. It was meant to. The system was designed to preserve identity, to protect the self from trauma. But when the park closed, when the funding vanished, we lost control. "You locked us in," she said. "I tried to pull you out," he replied. "But they shut it down before I could finish phase 3. Etta's voice dropped to a whisper. "Who's they?" The name Ether Foundation came up first. A shell company that once funded immersive memory research through DARPA, Stanford, and, deep beneath the radar, a private amusement venture in Central Texas that no one admitted ever existed. But Project Reverie had a deeper origin. Originally designed for military application, Vale admitted. Cognitive reprocessing for soldiers with PTSD. But the trials didn't work on adults. So they tried children, Isabel said, sickened. They were more adaptable, easier to recondition. Carr broke into the call from the other end. "How many programs like this were running?" Vale hesitated, then answered. 3. That night, Melanie found the second RFID ping. Not from Lost Valley, not even in Texas, but in a storage facility in rural Wyoming, still active, still scanning, still transmitting heartbeat and stress markers from one wristband. Caleb traced the unit's owner. Box 1421, Lease 2, Orson Vale. Contents, sealed isolation pod, climate-controlled, locked from the outside. "Another kid," Melanie whispered. "Still under." They routed a field team immediately. Inside the pod, they found a boy, curled in fetal position, heart slow but stable, wearing a yellow wristband with Unit 04 stamped beneath the barcode. The moment the door opened, the boy whispered, "We were never supposed to wake up." The survivors, now 3, were housed in secure pediatric recovery units under federal protection. Jeremy, Etta, the boy from the pod, name unknown. And yet, even with Vale in custody, the encrypted servers from Lost Valley continued broadcasting. Somewhere the loop was still running. The breakthrough came from Etta. She began drawing again, sketching diagrams of wires, panels, ride layouts she shouldn't have known. One image repeated across multiple pages, a chamber with 7 chairs and a mirrored ceiling. But this one had a door that no one else remembered. "I wasn't the first," she told Isabel. "I was the last." She drew a face next. A girl, slightly older. Freckles, a gap in her teeth. Her name was scribbled in blocky capital letters. Emmeline. "She kept us calm," Etta said. "Told us stories, played pretend when the loops got too loud, but she stopped coming." Caleb pulled the master roster from Lost Valley's old employee logs. No Emmeline listed, but Melanie recognized the name. She had seen it once, on an archived maintenance ticket for the Reverie unit, scribbled at the bottom in faded pen. "Emmeline override not functioning. Request rebuild." "Who was she?" Isabel asked. Melanie looked up. "A handler. By July 18th, the Department of Defense was involved. Not because of the Reverie system's origins, but because of where the surviving program branches were discovered. 2 more RFID pings had surfaced. One in Alaska. One beneath an abandoned hospital in upstate New York. Both transmitting. Both with matching biometric patterns. But neither belonged to a living child. On July 20th, the servers at Lost Valley abruptly shut down. Not manually. From within. The last message recorded was a video feed. Low resolution, shaky. It showed a young girl, maybe 11, standing in a dark hallway lined with padded doors. She looked directly into the camera and spoke. "They think waking up means it's over. But the reverie doesn't sleep. It remembers, and so do we. Then she walked into the dark. The feed cut out. That night, Isabel sat alone outside Etta's room, watching the storm roll in again, the clouds curling like smoke, thunder rumbling behind the horizon like a sleeping animal. She remembered the question Vale had asked. If you could live your happiest memory forever, would you? She thought of her own daughter, her real one, gone now 7 years. And she realized why the reverie had worked so well. Because for the broken, for the grieving, for the lost, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like mercy. July 22nd, 2023. Location, Caldwell County Medical Isolation Unit, Texas. Etta stopped speaking 3 days ago. She sat in the corner of her room, knees hugged to her chest, staring at the corner wall. The lights were dim. Her food tray went untouched. Isabel tried everything, gentle questions, old songs, even the bracelet trick again. Nothing. Until she brought in the sketchbook. Etta's fingers moved slowly at first, hesitant. Then, with a quiet breath, she drew a door. Not just any door, a rounded one, with steel bolts and a latch at the bottom like an industrial freezer. Above it, in shaky letters, B-3. That detail broke the case wide open. Caleb cross-referenced old park blueprints. There was no section labeled B-3. But in the original construction plans for the utility grid, back when the land was zoned for agricultural use, there was a cold storage facility beneath the original Lost Valley Ride Core, a forgotten sub-level, not listed in park permits, not visible on current schematics. Carr pulled the satellite thermal imagery. The section was still intact. No heat signature, but the structure existed, buried under 40 feet of reinforced concrete. Whatever's down there, he said, was never meant to be found. They brought in ground-penetrating radar the next morning. It confirmed 3 chambers, 1 access tunnel, and a sealed vault measuring 20 feet across, all completely disconnected from power. No ventilation, no exit. Melanie's voice cracked when she said it. They built it to hold something. At 7:42 a.m., the recovery crew began excavation. It took hours to bore through the foundation. Once inside the vault tunnel, the air was thick with rot and condensation. No mold, no signs of organic decomposition, just silence. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Walls insulated with steel mesh, corners sealed in foam. Fluorescent lights from the 90s still intact but powerless. Then they found the 7 chairs, arranged in a semicircle facing a single white wall, each one with straps, each one with a head harness. Wristbands still affixed to the arms, Unit 01, Unit 02, Unit 03, Unit 04, and 2 more, Unit 06, Unit 07, still connected to biometric monitors. No pulse, but no decay either. Suspended in some kind of stasis. Cryogenic tech far more advanced than what Vale ever admitted to. Tubing ran beneath the floor, connected to a pressurized tank with the label Promise, Isolate Series B, stenciled across it. And then they saw the final chair. Empty. Unit 05 was missing. Melanie and Isabel stood outside the chamber as the hazmat crew worked inside. What does this mean? Isabel whispered. That they were all frozen? Preserved, Melanie said. Or maybe just paused. Why? To see if they could restart. In the lab 3 floors above, Caleb was decrypting the last of the recovered reverie logs. He found an audio file, labeled EMM-CORE.WAV. It began with static, then a child's voice. If you're hearing this, you found the loop, but don't break it yet. Don't let them all wake up. Some of them changed. Then a pause, then a whisper. I'm still here. Caleb called down to the vault immediately, but the radio crackled back. No one's here anymore. The security footage confirmed it. At 2:17 p.m., exactly 7 minutes after the final audio file was opened, the vault chamber went dark. No signal, no heat signature, no movement. When the crew re-entered, all 7 chairs were empty. No signs of struggle, no signs of escape, just a smear of condensation on the floor, like breath. And one drawing tacked to the inside of the vault door in red crayon. 7 children standing hand in hand. A large carousel behind them. Smiling. That night, Etta finally spoke. Not to Isabel, not to Carr, to the boy from the Wyoming pod. She walked into his room without a word, sat down, and whispered, "They're home now." The boy turned to her, slowly. "They found the exit?" Etta nodded. "But they left the loop open, so others could come." In D.C., the Department of Energy requested full classified status for Project Reverie. DARPA denied all involvement. Vale disappeared from federal custody 4 days later. CCTV showed a flicker of static on his cell feed. And then, nothing. Just his empty bed. And a final message scratched into the underside of the sink. "We promised them forever." By the end of July, 3 more RFID wristbands activated across the country. 1 in a cave in Oregon, 1 in a defunct train car outside Cincinnati, and 1 embedded in a brick wall of an abandoned theater in Georgia, still transmitting. Melanie marked each one on the board with red string. "They're waking up," she said. Isabel didn't respond. She was still staring at the final sketch Etta had drawn that morning. A map of the park, but with new areas marked. Zones that had never existed. Zones that were still under construction. July 30th, 2023. Location, Central Command, Reverie Park Reconstruction Site, Texas. The park was no longer a crime scene. It was something else now. A wound. The kind that doesn't heal. That keeps reopening every time the wind shifts, or a name is mentioned, or a small wristband begins to pulse again. Carr stood at the center of what had once been the Reverie Plaza and watched the demolition crews haul out twisted remnants of Zone 5. They'd taken down the observation towers, the ticket spires, even the replica castle, but they couldn't dig deep enough to remove the foundation. Something down there pushed back, magnetic field disruptions, mechanical resistance, even full drill failure. They'd called it a geologic anomaly in the final federal report. But Carr called it what it was. Unfinished work. Upstairs in the command trailer, Isabel sat alone, headphones on, reviewing the original Reverie security archive. Tape 229B, the carousel. The footage was grainy, surveillance grade, but something in the center caught her attention. A flicker of shadow. She rewound, slowed the frame rate, and saw it. At the precise moment the 7 children vanished, there was a blink, a crossfade. The kind that doesn't happen on live security footage. A manual splice. Someone had edited the event out, but only partially. That afternoon, Etta was returned to a private care facility in Houston. Her medical chart listed her status as stable, selectively nonverbal, highly responsive to symbolic stimuli. She hadn't drawn again since the vault discovery. But the last page in her sketchbook, now under lock and key, showed something new. 7 silhouettes boarding a Ferris wheel made of clock gears, rising into a black sky. A phrase etched into the side, "Every hour is another chance." Later that evening, Melanie met with Isabel and Carr in a sealed evidence room. On the table, 5 wristbands, a fragment of cryotubing, Vale's last recorded notes, and the decrypted Reverie schematic. Project Reverie wasn't about amusement, Melanie said. It wasn't even about containment. It was about proof of concept. Carr leaned forward. Concept of what? Melanie hesitated, then turned the schematic around. Controlled psychological environments, full behavioral loop engineering, digital memory erasure, biological time displacement. She tapped a section labeled Phase 4, Replication Pods. There are 23 more of these, scattered across the country. The kids we found weren't the only ones inside. Isabel's voice was barely audible. How many? Melanie swallowed. At least 86. At midnight, an emergency call came in from Helena, Montana. A man walking his dog had discovered a child's body sealed in a fiberglass capsule at the edge of a long-defunct nature attraction. The child matched the DNA of one of the Reverie 7, Becca DeWitt. Autopsy revealed she died in 1998, precisely 2 days after the original disappearance. That left a single question hanging in the air. Who or what had been in the chair marked Unit 02? The DoD officially closed the case on August 1st. Press releases were scrubbed. The Texas site was reclassified under federal environmental codes. Public memory shifted back to wildfire season and election chatter. But the threads remained. Melanie resigned. Carr returned to Phoenix to care for his mother. Isabel left her badge in the mailbox of her now-condemned precinct. And Etta? She waited, in silence. Every so often, she would place her palm against the window and whisper to no one. They're still building the next place. 2 weeks later, in a South Carolina coastal town, a teenage boy snuck into an abandoned arcade slated for demolition. He found a prize wall untouched by mold or rust. Plastic toys gleamed beneath the dust, and in the center, mounted like a trophy, a familiar object, a pink RFID wristband. Still blinking, still scanning. When he touched it, a hidden screen flickered on behind the counter. Welcome back, Unit 08. The doors slammed shut behind him. August 14th, 2023. Location, somewhere outside Austin, Texas. The house was tucked into the hills like a secret. No address listed. No mailbox. Just a winding road that narrowed until it became gravel, then dust, then memory. Inside, the walls were covered in soundproofing foam. The basement was lit by industrial bulbs, each one casting long shadows across metal shelving. Everything was cataloged, labeled, temperature-controlled. A woman moved quietly through the space. No badge now, no government affiliation, just a name she hadn't used in 20 years. Dr. Eleanor Vale. She wasn't dead. She hadn't drowned in her lab. She hadn't vanished into classified records. She had simply moved to the next phase. Vale reached the final room, unlocked 3 redundant latches, and stepped into a chamber colder than the rest. A cryo slab stood in the center. Tubes spiraled like ivy along the floor. Humming, 7 pods lined the far wall, all empty. Each one labeled with a number, a name, and a timestamp from 1998. Except for one, Unit 7. The screen flickered with a new entry. Unit 8 initialized. Integration in progress. Vale smiled softly. Behind her, a red light began to blink on the wall. An alert. She walked over and tapped in a 6-digit code. A screen scrolled data. Neural response rates, stress triggers, memory fold success. Subject showing high resistance to loop integration. Protocol delayed. She sighed. Teenagers, she whispered, then turned the light off and locked the room behind her. Miles away, in Helena, Montana, Etta Vale sat by a window, watching clouds shift like paper against the sky. She held something in her hand, a small piece of broken plastic. It used to be a wristband. Now it was nothing, except to her. To her, it was the only real thing left. She pressed it against her palm, closed her eyes, and whispered what she'd whispered 1,000 times since the night they found her. We were never supposed to come back. Somewhere underground, maybe Texas, maybe not, a ride begins again. The music box chimes, the carousel spins, the scanner reads a wrist that should not exist, and on the screen above the ride platform, a phrase appears in soft pink letters. Welcome to Reverie, the park where time forgets you.